Hi guys, my name is Ben Guilford. I'm the owner of the Firebrick Company, and this is the first of a two-part video series on how to build a stand for your wood-fired pizza oven. A wood-fired oven stand needs two things. You need walls and you need a bench top for the oven to sit on. And this video is going to be all about the walls. So we're going to take you through how to use a range of different materials to build the walls for your oven. So let's get into it. One of the most popular materials to use for making walls for your wood-fired oven stand are these bad boys. So these in Australia anyway are called Besser blocks. In America, I think you call them Cinder Blocks or concrete masonry units. They have different names all around the world, but the beauty of these is that they're very standard and they're available almost everywhere you go. Any landscape yard, not just in Australia, but in America, Canada, and a whole bunch of other countries will have something very much like these. These are commonly used for building walls for multi-story buildings, car parks, things like that. So they're structurally incredibly strong, and you might be looking at them a little nervously thinking, oh, Ben, I haven't even laid bricks before, let alone blocks this big. Mortaring those together looks a little hard. The good news is you don't have to mortar them together. We're going to be stacking them on top of each other. I'm going to dry stack the blocks and then fill the cores with wet concrete and reinforcing. And that's what's going to hold that whole structure together. We don't have to mortar the blocks together to make it strong. What we're actually relying on is the concrete and the reinforcing that's going to be in the cores of the wall. It's going to tie it all together and give it incredible structural integrity. It will effectively be a small bomb shelter in your backyard. Okay, so your first instinct when you start using these blocks is going to be to lay them out butting up against each other, because they do butt up rather nicely against each other, like this. And you might do that and go, look, that looks nice and neat, fantastic. And you'll lay your whole first row of blocks and they'll look perfect, they'll look great. Then you'll go to lay your next layer of block and you'll get to one end and you realize it's overhanging. They just won't line up properly. And why is that? And the reason is these blocks are designed to be used with mortar. So in this case, this is referred to as a 200 series block. So it's nominally 200 mil wide, 200 mil tall, and 400 mil long. In America, they're referred to as an 8-inch block, so they'll be 8 inches tall, 8 inches wide, and 16 inches long. Or are they? Because they're not. They're not those dimensions at all. That's just a reference. Throws you out though. So the dimensions of this block here, this block is not 400 mil long, it's 390. And it's not 200 mil deep, it's 190. And the reason for that is that there's an allowance for 10 millimeters of mortar in between each block, side by side. The same thing happens for the imperial system. So instead of 16 inches long, no, they're not 16 inches, they're 15 and 5/8, I believe. You need to double check that. Same with the depth of them. They won't be 8 inches, they'll be 7 inches and 5/8. You love your fractions, I tell you. So that is something that can catch you out if you're not aware of it. So be aware of it. All you need is just a 10 mil spacer, or in the land of freedom, you'd want a 3/8 inch spacer. And you can use that between the blocks to set the gap so that you have your 10 millimeter or 3/8 of an inch mortar gap allowed in between each block. So I'll demonstrate now and you'll see what I'm talking about. Right, so I've got all the blocks laid here, and this is actually something I did when I used Besser blocks for the very first time. I did exactly this. I laid my first course of blocks, they looked ace, and then I went to lay my second course, and I found that when I got to the end of the row, I realized there's an overhang here, and it's about 5 millimeters. And I thought, what have I done? Have I left a bit of a gap in between each one? And they weren't, they were hard against each other. And it's just because that's what's going to happen with the dimensions of these blocks. They will add up to an overhang if you don't allow a gap in between. So what I'll do now, I'll deconstruct this and I'll use my 10 mil spacer here to set a 10 mil gap in between each block side by side, and you'll see it'll work perfectly. Okay, so you can see that if you use a spacer in between each block, so if you allow that 10 millimeter or 3/8 of an inch gap between each block, they'll line up perfectly, that's just the way they're designed. So once you know that, you can work around that. I'm using this little spacer here. You could get anything that's 10 millimeter thick, ideally something that's actually the full width of the block, because it will actually help keep the block lined up in the right direction, following a straight line, whereas when you use something quite small like this, it can pivot around that. So find yourself a spacer of the right thickness. So again, these blocks here, I know the intended mortar width is 10 millimeters. In America, I believe it's 3/8 of an inch, but that is something that you could check with your local landscape yard. Okay, so that's the first thing that we need to be aware of when we're using these blocks. Now we'll get down on the floor and I'll show you the next step. So you might be wondering, all right, well, how do I know exactly how big my stand is going to be? How do I know the layout of my blocks? There's a few ways you could figure that out. You could jump on our website and have a look there, because we have a whole bunch of stand designs that we put up in PDF form using these sort of blocks that you could use. So you could just grab one of those and grab the dimensions straight from there. If you wanted to make something custom, then there's a few ways of doing that. You could just go and get some blocks. Go and grab a handful of blocks from your local landscape yard and bring them home and lay them out and try a few different layouts and see what's going to work for your home. Another way of doing it, which is a bit of fun, is to make a scale model effectively. So cut out scale pieces of cardboard that represent the blocks and the half blocks, and then lay them out on a scale map of your backyard and see if you can come up with a design that works for you. So my stand here is going to be for a P85, and this is going to be 1190 mil wide by 1390 mil deep. Notice not 1200 by 1400. And that's because, again, we're missing that 10 millimeters here for that mortar joint. So we won't get to a full 1200 wide or 1400 depth. We're going to be 10 mil shy of that. All right, so the best way, I think, is really to get your hands on some blocks and just have a play with them and figure out a layout that you like. And then from there, you'll be able to figure out, right, how many do I need to complete all of the rows that I want to do, and you can go and order those. If your foundations are flat and level, then you can just grab your blocks, lay them onto your foundations and start stacking them up. Go for it. However, if your foundations are not quite level, or maybe they're not flat, maybe there's some humps and bumps in your slab that you don't really like, then you'd be well advised to mortar down your first course of blocks. So that would deal with a slope. So for example, if my foundations here were on an angle this way, then I could raise up this side on a bed of mortar, bring that around, and the bed of mortar on this side obviously would be much thinner, and that would take up that difference in the angle of my slab. Okay, so if you've got a slab that's on a slope, you can take that up in your first course with a bed of mortar. If your slab is a bit wonky, if it's just kind of rough, it's got some bumps and lumps in it, then you could grind those down. So you could get like a diamond grinding wheel and grind the high spots down. Or again, you could just go straight to mortaring that first course of blocks down. You're just going to need a level and a little bit of patience. Get that first course flat. If you get that first course nice, flat and level, then the rest of the blocks will sit perfectly on top. You'll be very glad that you did. We've got our first row in place, and now we're going to start laying our second row. I would recommend at this point you just dry lay the second row just to make sure that it all fits, that you've got all your joints right, that you've gotten your layout lines correct, because you wouldn't be the first person to get that wrong. In fact, I got that wrong about 5 minutes ago. And so make sure, so do a dry fit of your next row and just make sure everything lines up the way you're expecting it to. And then you need to make the decision as to whether you just want to dry stack the blocks or you want to glue them together. Okay, now like I said at the start, you don't need to use any mortar for these blocks. You can, if you really want to, you could put a bed of mortar down and mortar these all together, but it really doesn't add, in my mind, really any value. It's going to be just as strong if we dry stack them and pour the cores full of concrete and put that rebar in there. Okay, so for the sake of ease, I don't actually recommend mortaring the blocks together. You can just dry stack them. The only issue with dry stacking them is they're loose. And so if you kick one, if you bump into it while you're trying to pour concrete into the cores, for example, then they are likely to move. And if that worries you, then you can always use something like this. We have liquid nails. Now, that's a brand name. I'm not affiliated with Sellies in any way, although Sellies do reach out. But there's varieties of this in every country. You can find a construction adhesive that's actually specifically designed for use with masonry. Okay, this is actually something that's only been around probably the last decade, and it's becoming really popular because gluing blocks together is really effective. It's really fast, it's really easy, and you don't even need to use very much of it. Okay, so if I was going to glue these blocks together, all I would be doing is just putting a little dob of the adhesive in each corner where the next block is going to come down and meet. I'm not going to use a whole lot of it. I would just use a small amount on those corners and put my next block on, and then I'd move on and repeat the same thing. Just check the instructions on the glue that you're using to make sure. It might have some guidance as to whether it works on a wet surface. Some of them will work on a wet surface, others will need the blocks to be dry for the bond to actually work. Okay, so just be aware of that. But that's the other sort of beautiful thing about using cinder blocks is you can just glue them together with liquid nails. Now that's not the final step. We're still going to fill them with concrete, but by using liquid nails or a similar construction adhesive, you can fill the cores easily without worrying about bumping into the blocks and disturbing your beautiful blockwork. Okay, so that's my second tip for using cinder blocks. All right, the beautiful Marcus is helping me. I'm so grateful for that. We'll stack up the rest of these and get them in place. A couple more tips for using cinder blocks, just as I'm going here, is you'll find that the top of the blocks, generally speaking, will probably have a little bit of rubble left on them from the manufacturing process. So if you clean that off as you go, you'll find the next layer of blocks will sit a lot more nicely. Even if you do that though, you are likely to find blocks rocking just slightly. Now, if that worries you, you can shim that up with even a little bit of cardboard. But if you're using the glue, it's going to take up that rocking anyway. Again, here I'm just dry stacking these for the purpose of this video. We'll keep going regardless of just a little bit of rocking. It doesn't worry me because in the end, this is not something I'm going to see. So all of this is going to disappear behind either a coat of render or something like stack stone or a facade that we're going to put over the face of the brick. This is not the finished surface. So even if the rows aren't perfectly even, if your joints wander up and down just a little bit, it doesn't actually matter because you're going to cover it all anyway. So we just want this to be structurally strong, which it's definitely going to be. The other tip, of course, is that you want to keep a brick bond. It's a fairly obvious thing to say, but I will say it regardless. So you'll notice I started the first row with a full block. The second row, I've actually started with a half block, and that's to ensure that I get brick bond, which is my vertical joints are offset by half the width of the block. Okay, so yeah, make sure when you're doing your maths, you're figuring out how many blocks you need, allow for some half blocks to give you that brick bond. I've got 4 courses of blocks here stacked up, and for some that might be the perfect height. For others you might want to go a full block higher than that, but you may want to use a half block, and these may not be available everywhere, but this was something available at our local landscape supply store. It's a half height cinder block, and so I could do a whole nother row of these if I wanted to get up to the ideal height, if that was the ideal height for me. The only thing I did find was that they didn't actually have blocks in the half height. Go figure. So I was going to have to cut these down if I wanted to make half blocks, which you can do quite easily just with a diamond blade on an angle grinder. Again, I mentioned using the adhesive earlier, and I haven't done that here because this is a temporary setup. I'm just wanting to demonstrate how to use these blocks to you. So if I bump into these blocks, I can move them around, okay? And if I was to do that while I was pouring the cores full of concrete, then if I don't move them back again, they're going to set in that position. Now, I have done this before. I just use a rubber mallet while I'm doing the pour to knock the blocks back into the position that I wanted them to be in. Okay, so remember, you don't have to use liquid nails to hold these together, but it certainly doesn't hurt. We've got our blocks all dry stacked here, and you see how easy that was. It really is a very straightforward process using cinder blocks, and that's why I really recommend it. It's nice and simple. You can get them almost anywhere, and it's very quick. So I've just dry stacked these blocks, and obviously that's not how we're going to leave it. Even if I had glued these blocks together, I still wouldn't leave it at that point. There's still another step to go, and that is we need to core fill the blocks. And you'll see inside the blockwork, there's cores. They all line up on top of each other, these vertical cores, and the design there is to fill that with wet concrete and then put a piece of reinforcing steel bar into that wet concrete to give it strength, okay? And that's actually what's going to make this structure really strong. So what you would do is you would get just basic concrete. It doesn't have to be particularly strong. 20 MPa, 25 MPa is more than strong enough. You can get bagged concrete from your local landscape yard, or you could mix up your own with sand, cement and aggregate, and do that on site. Alternatively, if you're doing quite a large number of blocks, you could look at getting a mini mix, small batch of concrete delivered, which is always nice if you can get it. And you would pour that into these cores, and then the next step is, well, how far does that reinforcing need to protrude from the blockwork? If you're going to be doing a suspended concrete slab on top of these blocks, you'll want your reinforcing bar to come up out of the blocks so that when you pour it into your reinforced concrete bench top, that bar is tying in to the suspended slab on top. However, if you're not going to be pouring a reinforced concrete slab on top as your bench top, then I would recommend you get your reinforcing bar and push it down into the concrete so that it's sitting at least 2 inches or 50 millimeters below the surface, the top surface of the block, so that it's protected from the atmosphere and from rust. So you can see I've got all the cores filled here, and now we're ready for our next step, which is setting up the bench top. Now, if you were thinking of doing a reinforced concrete bench top, maybe you're planning on doing polished concrete as your bench top for your wood-fired oven, then we actually have an entire video series dedicated to that whole process, walking you from start to finish through formwork, reinforcing, concrete, screeding, troweling, the whole lot. It's quite involved. And so it's a great video series. I think you really enjoy it. So I've linked that in the description. So if you're thinking about doing a reinforced concrete slab, then please check out that video series and make sure when you're doing your block walls that you leave your reinforcing protruding at least 50 millimeters out of the top of your block so that it engages with that suspended concrete slab. What we're going to be doing with these blocks is I'm going to be demonstrating a couple of other methods that you can use different to a reinforced concrete slab, slightly easier than a reinforced concrete slab. And so I've actually pushed the rebar down into those cores below this surface to protect it from the atmosphere and from corrosion. If you live in Australia and you're thinking about building your wood-fired oven stand using masonry, I would highly recommend you look for the Adbri VersaLock blocks. They're absolutely brilliant. I don't have any shares in the company. I should probably get some because this technology looks very simple, but it's fantastic. Because look, you could use cinder blocks, or also known as Besser blocks, for building your stand. They're very effective, but they do have the downside of really they're designed to be put together using mortar. And while you can dry stack them, you kind of need to glue them together to keep them from moving around. VersaLock blocks don't require that at all. This is a concrete block that's actually been designed to be dry stacked. So you start off with a nice flat concrete foundation, you get your VersaLock blocks and basically you lay them like great big Lego, and they just almost click together because they have this tongue and groove system for the blocks laying on top of each other. You've got these grooves in the top here. They also have a tongue and groove system in the ends, so that when they butt up against each other, they just lock together beautifully. So if you're in Australia, I'd highly recommend you look for these. If you're outside of Australia, at the time of filming, you won't be able to find them, which, yeah, not ideal. By all means, have a look around for an interlocking block in your country, but as of the time of filming, these are only available in Australia. So let me show you how they work. Okay, so the VersaLock block system has 5 different blocks. You have the straight block. This is the one you're going to use the most. This is for doing straight runs. It's open at both ends. Nice and simple. Then we have the full end unit. So it looks very similar to a straight block, except it has one end completely closed off. And that's great for terminating the end of a wall. Over here we have the half end block, which is basically exactly the same as full end, just half as long, and that's going to enable us to get our brick bond pattern that we need. And then over on the left here, we have corners. So when you reach a corner in your wall and you want to turn to the left or the right, you can use the left or the right hand corner, and you'll see they look very similar to a full end block, but they actually have the tongue and groove joint on one side of the block as well. And so that enables you to turn a corner. Best way to show you and sort of take you through it is just to demonstrate it. So I'll get these down on the floor and show you how they work. Just like cinder blocks, the VersaLock blocks can be laid directly onto a concrete slab, providing that concrete slab is flat and level. If the slab is out of level or it's not flat, it's got some bumps and humps in it that you need to deal with, then you would be well advised to mortar your first course of VersaLock blocks down so that you get that first course nice, flat and level, and then the rest of the blocks will sit perfectly on top of each other. Okay, so if you've got a nice flat slab, just get into it. But if your slab's a bit all over the place, then mortar your first course down. Just grab a level, take your time, get that first course right, and everything else from there will go really smoothly. Okay, I have drawn out on the floor here the layout that I'm going to be following for laying my blocks, and I got that layout from a drawing on our website. So we've actually put up a whole bunch of designs of different stand layouts using the Adbri VersaLock blocks. So you can jump on our website, download those, it'll tell you exactly how many blocks you need, which type, how many full ends, half ends, straight blocks, left and right corners. All of that's detailed in those designs. And so you can get that information from those drawings and then draw that out on your floor so that when you're laying your blocks, particularly your first course, they end up in the right place and you end up building the stand that you had in mind. Now, if you would prefer to do something yourself, you'd be very welcome to. You don't need to follow our designs. You could get onto CAD, do a 3D model of how these blocks go together, and please reach out to us if you do want 3D models to play with. We're very happy to send them to you. Alternatively, you could go down to your local landscape yard, get yourself some of these blocks, so get some full ends, some straights, some half ends, some corners, and just experiment. Just lay them out on the floor in your backyard and see what is going to work for you. And again, once you have that first layer down, then you should be able to figure out how many of each block you're going to need to do all of the layers. Okay, now something else I will mention about the Adbri VersaLock system, which I do love very, very much. They do come in a few different thicknesses. So what I'm dealing with here is what they call the 200 series. They also have a 150 series and I think it's a 100 series, and they're all different thicknesses. So their 200 series you would think is 200 millimeters wide. You'd be wrong, they're 190. Go figure. So these are 190 wide. The 150 series, I believe they are actually 150 wide, and then the 100 series I think are 90 mil wide. I would be recommending you use either the 150 series or the 200 series. You may find in your particular area you're limited to the 200 series because they are the more common block. The 150 series is just is going to be just as strong, or more than strong enough for the kind of structure that we're going to be building here. I'll get into it, and you'll see how these blocks go together. They just click together beautifully. Something you will find with the VersaLock blocks is that they might have some just residual, I'm going to call them a burr, but a little bit of excess concrete where there's not meant to be. And so you can just knock those down with a hammer. You just want to remove those, because if you try and place the next block on it, it's just going to sit a bit awkwardly. You can see that's not sitting right at all. So we just want to knock those down. So I can just get my hammer, just remove those. I've knocked those burrs down. Now this block is going to sit really nicely. All right, so just keep an eye out for those. They won't occur on every single block. It's typically on the end units I see them the most. So yeah, just be prepared to get your hammer out and clean them up. So our blocks are all stacked, and that's really how easy it is to use the VersaLock blocks. They're really straightforward. I highly recommend, again, if you're in Australia, get your hands on these and use them, because they just go together so neatly and easily, particularly once you have a design in mind. So now from here, obviously we can't just leave them like this. They are still quite loose. They can still move around on us if we can't just build our bench top on top of these as they are. What we need to do is fill all of the cores with concrete. And then in every second core, got to get a piece of rebar and put that into the wet concrete, wiggle it down into the wet concrete to help the concrete flow through the cores, and drop that right in there. Now, what you do with this reinforcing really depends on what you're planning on doing for the bench top. If you're going to make your bench top out of reinforced concrete, so you're going to form up and pour a reinforced concrete slab on top of this, like I have done with the oven to my left, then you'll actually want to leave these bars sitting out of the blocks by about 50 millimeters. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow the concrete from the next pour, from your slab pour, your suspended slab, to actually bite onto those starter bars that are coming out of your walls and tie your suspended slab into the walls. If you're not going to be pouring a suspended slab, if you're going to use a different method to create your bench top, then you would actually take the bar and you would push it all the way down into the concrete such that it's sitting about 50 mil below the surface of your core fill, so that it's protected from rust in the long term. Okay, so that particular concrete that you need to use, just 20 to 25 MPa, nothing particularly strong. You can get bagged concrete from your local landscape yard, or you could mix up your own with sand, cement and aggregate, and do that on site. Alternatively, if you're doing quite a large number of blocks, you could look at getting a mini mix, small batch of concrete delivered, which is always nice if you can get it. Okay, so that's your basics of using the VersaLock blocks. I will say one more thing on if you're planning on using an alternative benchtop system to the reinforced concrete slab, and that will be, you will need to just grind off these little tabs that are sitting up high. You'll want to knock those off or grind them off so that you get a nice flat surface on your block work to support your benchtop on. Feel free to come up with your own design, but we have lots of designs on our website that you can follow. So there are two more materials that I want to talk about when it comes to using masonry for building the walls of your oven stand. One of the most obvious ones, of course, is brick. So I've got some normal pressed red bricks here next to me, and you could use brick to build your stand. However, personally, I wouldn't actually recommend using brick to build your stand unless you have some experience with bricklaying. If you've done some bricklaying in the past and you're confident in laying brick, by all means, go for it. It's going to be more than strong enough to hold up the weight of the oven. No issue at all. But if this is your very, very first time dealing with bricks and blocks, I would suggest steering clear of using brick as your structural core, as the walls for supporting the benchtop. The reason being, that kind of bricklaying is actually kind of complicated. The string lines and getting all your vertical, your corners perfectly vertical and plumb and true, all of that is quite involved, and that's why bricklaying really is an art, and it takes some time to master. Now, if you want a brick look, but you are a little concerned about your bricklaying skills, you could lay blocks. So you could use Cinder Block or the VersaLock blocks to build the walls of your stand, and then you could clad that with brick, and then it's no longer structural, it's just there to enhance the aesthetic of the oven stand. So yes, unless you have some experience in laying brick, I wouldn't use brick for the walls of your oven stand. Right, the other material I have on my left here is landscape block. Now, this is not something that's particularly popular in Australia at this point, but it is something that is really big in America. So you have solid blocks that usually they might have a stone face or a rumbled face, or some kind of decorative finish on them, and they're just designed to be glued together with construction adhesive. So if you can find those in your part of the world, by all means, use those to build the walls of your stand. Very, very simple approach. You would just take the blocks, you would glue the first layer down onto your concrete foundations. If your concrete foundations weren't perfectly flat or they were on a bit of a slope that you didn't like, you could mortar that first course down, get them level, and then from there on, you move into using the construction adhesive to glue the blocks together. Okay, so landscape block, have a look for it. Again, Americans, Canadians, I think you're going to find these relatively easily, whereas in Australia, they're not a very popular product yet. It's not something that I've seen a whole lot of. But if you do find them, again, very, very simple to use. Just glue them together and make sure, obviously, you get the layout that you want that's going to suit your stand. So that's how you can use normal bricks or those awesome glued together landscape blocks to build the walls for your stand. If you have any questions about this process or just want some more guidance on how to build your stand for your wood-fired oven, please reach out to my team and myself. You can call us, email us, just reach out and we'll be very happy to help you.